Ahoy! Sometimes the videos that you think take the shortest actually end up taking the longest, so sorry about the delay on this one. But today we're going to talk about the current top 6 gods in the game. Now, top god lists are always a little bit complicated because you can look at very different perspectives depending on if you look at competitive, at ranked, at casual, and also what exact metric you use as the standard for what are the top gods. And I figured what I want to do is a bit of a mix of both with a focus more on the competitive side. So something that will be highly valued in this list is especially the pick and ban rate of a god. If a god is highly valued in competitive, they're usually very, very good. Then the win rate obviously is a factor as well. And then also if I think this character can be played well in a casual level. So you will not see the super hyper casual carries here that only perform well on a casual level or on a ranked level. But rather you will see the gods that perform well in competitive, but also do very well in non-competitive games, so you can pick them up yourself. And I will include builds for all of them based on their competitive builds, but builds that are easily applicable for a casual playstyle and that are generally applicable as well, not some outlier weird builds, so that you can use them and play them yourself. Also, apologies for not having matching footage for every single character. I hope you're okay with that. You've seen my recent OCE game maybe, so you know my motivation to play all of the characters in those conditions is not the highest right now. Now, with that out of the way, let's get started. In spot number 6, we have Amaterasu, one of the most picked gods in competitive at the moment. Not the most banned, but a total of 60% pick and ban rate anyways, with over 60% win rate, and that makes her stand out really, that she's played so much and she's still winning a lot. Amaterasu is just generally performing very well at the moment because a lot of the stars aligned for her basically. She has self-sustain in her kit, which is very valuable in solo at the moment, with there generally being less self-sustain, but she also uses Warrior's Blessing effectively. She also uses many of the new changed items effectively along with that, and she can also insert more of her attack speed focused items at the moment, which is something that's very useful for her to apply her passive more quickly and generally have more impact on team fights, where she shines anyways as more of a late game warrior. So the meta really favors her, and she is a very well-rounded character. What more could you want? In terms of build, the one that I would suggest is actually a relatively basic attack-focused build. You're starting off somewhat ability-based with Warrior's Blessing and with Warrior Tabai just to get that early sustain as well as some good early clear with her too. After that, you go into the Sledge. Now, the problem with solo lane builds is that they're generally situational, and sometimes you might want to have a specific defense item here first. So the Sledge is actually more of the option when, you just want a bunch of health. I know some solo laners really like rushing Sledge, others don't really like it. I think with Amaterasu it's fine, she's not really dependent on any other item. But you can also switch this up. After that, the 2 items that I would suggest, in whichever order depending on the matchup, are Berserker's Shield and Shogun's Kusari. What you notice is that both of them kind of rely on having the Sledge first to give you a base level of health to work with the defense that they have, and that's why you would typically have the option to at least go for Sledge first. But again, it depends a bit on the situation. In either scenario, you will get a lot of attack speed from this, but you will also get a decent mix of defense, and you will most certainly help your carries with the extra attack speed too. After that, if you can afford to do so, I would suggest going into Frostbound Hammer. This will ensure that you can maximize the usage of your attack speed in team fights and really be super helpful to your team in any regard, as you have even more CC and you can set that up even better in combination with your passive. So very, very strong. And then I would finish it up with a Mantle of Discord. You can also switch these around, go into Mantle of Discord first and then Frostbound, really depends on the situation. But overall this build gives you a little bit of everything. Fair bit of health, defense, cooldown reduction, and plenty of attack speed and slows for the enemies to go with. In spot number 5, we have my personal biggest thorn in the eye, and that is Oloran. A massive amount of bans and quite a few successful picks, 96% ban rate and pick and ban rate in the Pro League, as well as a 66.7% win rate. I don't think I need to explain all too much why Oloran is performing well at the moment. Ring of Hecate is just extremely strong, and in his case, it, in my opinion, allows him to actually utilize his kit properly. My opinion, he was just too restricted by the items that were there beforehand, while his kit was always relatively strong. More specifically, his ultimate is insanely strong, and especially in coordinated games and coordinated team fights, it's insanely good. But his win rate has been spiking everywhere, even in ranked casual level. He's just been climbing up the ranks and is one of the top performing guards everywhere. If you wanted to make the argument that he's the strongest guard in the game overall across all levels of play, I would not disagree with you right now, because he's just really, really good. So if you want to play this beast, then what would you want to build? In terms of blessings, I would suggest Hunter's Blessing. I think the benefit in combination with Ring of Fate is just too good to pass up on, even though of course you could argue for Mage's Blessing in one way or another as well. But I do think that he gets a lot more out of Hunter's Blessing in the long run. Ring of Fate is the next item you want to finish. It's just too good not to. I don't think I need to explain anything about this. It's just standard on every basic attack mage in the game right now, because it has all the stats you want, even after the nerfs. Along with that, you want to have Shoes of the Magi for significantly more power as well as extra lifesteal. Next, I would suggest Demonic Grip, because it just gives you even more attack speed and it also helps with any kind of tanky target. Even though the percentage value is not that strong against squishies, it's still strong enough. After that, Telekine's Ring to make your basic attacks hit even harder. After that, Typhon's Fang in order to maximize the lifesteal in combination with Ring of Fate. And last but not least, if you get to that point, I think you could go for Spear of the Magus, because I don't really think you need Haste in the Ring as much as on other magical ADCs, because he really has his ultimate do that, and otherwise, yeah, you're not going to chase after enemies all that much when that's down. But you could also go for a defensive choice at this point. You could go for Metal of Discord, Hide of the Mean Line. There are many options, because at that point you have enough damage either way. In spot number 4, we have a goddess that I did not expect to make it on this list prior to patch 7.7, but then after having played her a little bit, I can completely understand why she's where she is. Ironically, I actually wanted to make a video about her before the Pro League even started, but didn't get around to it, and that's who you're seeing in the background, and that's Nemesis. The build I used there is from before the Pro League's games, by the way, so the build may not be the best compared to what we have now. She's extremely valued by the pros right now with a 96% pick and ban rate, but different from Allround, she's actually picked a lot more and banned a fair bit less. She does currently sit on a 50% win rate, which is why she's not making spot number 1 here or anything, but in my opinion she's still extremely strong despite a few games not going her way. We're also still in week 2 and I expect her to continue to be at the top here, really. The reasons are simple. First of all, she got a damage buff to her Slice and Dice that's literally comparable to old Awilla's Feather Step on early ranks, so that's telling about how much damage that thing has now. And along with that, she also just benefits massively from a lot of item changes. That starts with Golden Blade, which was changed a while ago, but then also continues to item like Serrated Edge, like Atalanta's Bow, and all kinds of other things that she can utilize well. And she also works very well in quite a few of the current top picks. Between her ultimate and her reflect, she can counter quite a few of them relatively effectively, and that makes her a very valued choice. Now I'm going to give you a build for her, but keep in mind that there are a ton of different options that can actually work for her. The build I give you is relatively easy to execute and still works very effectively even on the highest level of play, so I wanted to use that as a baseline and I'll talk about some other options. In Conquest, you want to start with Assassin's Blessing into Golden Blade. In non-Conquest modes, you can go for Attacker's Blessing and then skip Golden Blade, basically, depending on the mode exactly, but that is what you're looking at the start. For Jungle Clear, this is just unbeatable still, even after the changes, and yeah, I think it has way too high value not to use it. After that, you go into Warrior's Blessing. That's to get the maximum out of her early ability damage that she has, especially in her 2. Even though she doesn't have the overall best scalings on everything, that is just such high burst at the moment that it's worth picking up and helps with Jungle Clear a ton as well. So I would suggest that, and I would not suggest going for double blades in most situations because boots are just cheaper and still give you so much, and most of these secondary blades are not as useful for her in many situations. After that, go for Brawler Speed Stick. If the enemy has absolutely no heal, then you can obviously go for Jones Wrath or for Crusher here, but most of the time you'll find someone with heal that makes Brawler Speed Stick a worthwhile choice. From there on, you go into Arendelle, just a fantastic item that synergizes highly with her ultimate, which is her best engaged tool anyway, so yeah, no reason not to. After that, I'd suggest Magi's Blessing, simply because hard CC is a massive counter to her and her shield, so taking away a little bit of that potential from the enemy can be very useful. To finish this off, you want to throw in an Atalanta's Bow. What this means is that you get a ton of percentage penetration. It also means that once you ult an enemy, you can get to them quicker, And once you get a kill on someone, you can get to the rest of the enemies quicker, or you can stick to them better. So at any point you have massive damage output, and it also gives you a little bit more of that late game attack speed, so outside of your attack cancels, you can also do a bit more damage through this. So I think this is a fantastic mix. But again, keep in mind Nemesis is super flexible in what you can build. You can sell your Golden Blade late game, and for even more snowball potential you can put a Bloodforge there. Or you can go for a completely different build and include items like Hastened Katana and Stonecutting Sword. That works very well too. You can include Serrated Edge for the percentage pen as well, even though I don't like it quite as much on Nemesis because I like to keep her mobility for a bit. You can also include Jotun's Wrath, you can include Heartseeker, really everything is possible. And last but not least, you can also very effectively use crit builds at the moment, especially if you revolve them around Malice. So your options are almost unlimited here. And you could literally switch from one build to the other. You could finish this build off by trading out things for Malice and then Wind Demon, for example. There's never been more build freedom on Nemesis, so utilize that however you like. In spot number 3, we have someone that I think many of you were expecting, and that is Freya. My prediction here ended up being right, and she's definitely one of the top performing gods overall, with a 100% pick and ban rate in competitive. She follows that up with a 70% win rate, so when she actually gets through, she still performs very, very well. She's, again, just an extremely strong user of Ring of Facade along with Olran. Those are the best ones for this item, so there's not much to say about why she's performing the way she is. It just is her meta through that item alone, and until that sees way more significant nerfs, that is not going to change. Build-wise, her item choices are similar to Olran, but with a small difference. You want to start the same way, Hunter's Blessing into Ring of Facade into Shoes of the Magi for the same reasons. But then I would suggest going into Hastened Ring. That's because Freya really comes online 100% once you have these items, because you can stick to enemies when you fire off your combo, and after your combo's on cooldown, you're not that useful anyways, so it doesn't really matter if the Hastened Ring is on cooldown at that point. That's when you want to retreat or go into your ultimate or banish the enemy. But at that point you're not really heavily engaging. So for her, this is all you need in terms of damage almost, and sometimes the game is over by this point anyways. If you go further than that, I would suggest looking towards Demonic Grip for even more protection shred. And then I like to go into Telekind's Ring. Some pros do, some others go into Typhon's Fang first. I would suggest that afterwards, but it really depends on the situation as well. If you need enough sustain, then Typhon's Fang is better and it also gives you some extra flat pen. But both options are fine, but you want to build both either way. And then after that, you can also consider looking towards a late game swap for Spear of the Magus, or you can choose to not go into Typhon's Fang and get Spear of the Magus if you really want to focus down the squishies. But either way, you will have enough damage, you'll have plenty. But yeah, interesting enough, there's really not ever any reason to change out any of the first 5 items. You also definitely want Hunter's Blessing because it's so strong on her, it works so well on her. So yeah, very set in stone build. In spot number 2, we have someone who's been highly controversial compared to the other ones, and that is Persephone. 100% pick and ban rate in the Pro League, a massive amount of bans, but when she gets through, she also wins. Even higher win rate than Freya by just a tiny bit, a 71.43% win rate. This win rate also translates over to higher levels of ranked, but she drastically falls off on lower levels of ranked, so keep that in mind. That is what sets her apart from the rest here, that she is harder to learn. If you pick up any of the other gods on this list at the moment, I think you have a pretty good chance of just learning them in the first game you play them, as long as you build right and level your abilities right. With Persephone, I don't think your first game will necessarily be that successful. Usually she takes a little bit more practice to get a feel for her. Build-wise, there are some flexibilities, but overall it's also pretty straightforward. You want to start with Mage's Blessing, nothing too crazy here, and then you're looking towards Spear of the Magus, though you want to typically finish your cooldown boots first. She benefits a lot from cooldown, and she doesn't have that many other items early on to get cooldown reduction, so I would suggest Shoes of Focus for that. After that, I'd go into Divine Ruin in most situations, though there may be the odd game where the enemy doesn't have any healing, at which point you could, for example, look towards Spear of Desolation, or another choice I mention a bit later. Then for extra power pen and everything else, you want to go into Soul Reaver, just an extremely strong item on Persephone, followed by Obsidian Shard to maximize the burst from her first ability, which can often be her ultimate. Then you have a little bit more flexibility. You could, for example, go into Chronos Pendant here, you could go into Staff of Myrden, Or you could go into Soul Gem. I think Soul Gem is an extremely interesting item for Persephone due to item interactions. It's also something that's used a fair bit, and that can also be put in place of Divine Ruin. I'm not going to go into detail about why Persephone is performing so well, because that would basically require its own video, but in its essence, it's her kit that is just way too strong in its current state and synergizes way too well with way too many things, and doesn't really have enough counters. But we'll save that for another day. Before we get to spot number 1, I have quite a few honorable mentions that I wanted to make. Hades only has 1 game played, but sits at 100% win rate at the moment. The interesting thing is that he does relatively well in non-competitive, and if we see more, we might see that translate over more as well. Cthulhu is obviously a very strong god who almost made the cut here, but his win rate in competitive doesn't quite hold up at the moment with 45%. He's towards the lower end of the high-ranking ones, but that doesn't mean that he's bad by any stretch. He's still very, very good, very, very strong to play. And for both of these gods, if you want to see builds for them, I would recommend checking out Final K's recent solo build guide where he goes over them. AMC, Amusen Cup, sits at 100% win rate with 4 wins. However, he's not very valued as a pick. He doesn't get banned at all. He just wins every game when he's picked in. And then we have quite a few other gods that have very high win rates for different reasons as well, like Xingtian, Kuzenbo, Raven, Jingwei, and Horus. Some of them unexpected, some of them kind of cool, like Kuzenbo. And then others that are just the default fallback pick if things don't go that well otherwise, or if you just want to have a safe pick and then you pick someone like Jingwei. But that's boring to talk about, honestly, because she hasn't really changed or anything. It's nothing new that she's good. She's not a new meta god. She's just always been a boring safe pick for a duo, and that's about it. We also have gods like Hercules coming into the meta that aren't quite performing as well as the best ones, but still very good ones overall and worth mentioning. And then there's some other gods that didn't make it, that are not quite honorable mentions, but that I think a lot of people thought would make it. And among those are Arachne, Anubis, Nike, Cupid, Chang'e, and Skadi. All of them are very highly valued or perform very well in ranked, but unfortunately for those, the performance does not carry over to competitive. And that brings us to the one where it really carried over to competitive, to our spot number 1. With 100% pick and ban rate in the Pro League and an 83.3% win rate, it's Yemoja. This is not entirely shocking because it's in many ways a continuation of her previous stats, but her performance is just so overwhelmingly good that I could not talk about her in first place because she's just beating everyone else in every single stat. But what is also worth noting about Yemoja is that her performance does not translate well over to non-competitive at all. Even on the highest level of ranked, her performance does not even remotely match that of her competitive performance. She is, generally speaking, mostly even under 50% win rate. I think this is for a variety of reasons. I think her kit is very hard to master, but on top of that, different from many other gods, she also requires you to strategically build in order to get the maximum performance. So say below diamond level, you will see many players that don't even max out her build. And I, as someone who has never really actively played Yemoja to that degree, also didn't really realize how much the pros max out the builds prior to looking at these stats in detail. Her core kit is obviously very strong and is what allows her to perform so well in this meta, but I do think that knowing how her builds work effectively is a major step, and therefore I hope this video will help a little bit with that knowledge. So the build that I suggest here is obviously a very flexible one based on the fact that every support build has to be flexible depending on the situation. But this build is one that incorporates maximum cooldown reduction as well as reaching the threshold for the extra Omi point from Mana and MP5. You're starting off with a Guardian's Blessing into Shoes of Focus. Shoes of Focus is important because you want to have that mana from these boots. If you were to opt into other shoes, then you basically have to toy around with items like How to the Urchin in order to get sufficient mana, so that makes things a lot more complicated. After that, you go into Gauntlet of Thebes, just your staple support item. Then, I would suggest opting into Pridwin. While it doesn't cap your mana the same way that Breastplate of Valor does, you will still get a lot of CDR, a much better passive, because it has a passive in the first place, and better mixed defense. I think in most situations that's worth more, and the CDR is more valuable than the extra Omi point in my opinion, because you will regenerate so much more Omi over time. After that, I would suggest building Hide of the Nemean Lion, as long as it's effective against that team comp, because this item comes with 200 mana and 20 MP5, meaning that in combination with your shoes, this will be sufficient to reach the full passive. The next item to get some magical defense in is Genji's Guard, but Genji's Guard also has a very nice side effect. And that is whenever the passive procs, you actually instantly regain Omi. It doesn't work like MP5 or something, it doesn't work anything towards your meter at the bottom, you just regain the Omi instantly. And I think getting an extra point of Omi in the middle of a fight is very effective in many situations. The finishing item here is Lotus Crown to spread some more defense across your team because the heal is too easy to apply. But there are many options at this point that you can go for. You have maxed out CDR through the items, so things are very flexible. There are definitely crazier build paths that are possible, for example things surrounding Chronos Pendant, but I would say in order to have a good baseline, this is a build to start with that can be adjusted depending on the situation. You can switch items around to make it a little bit more suitable, or if you can't fit things in other ways, then you can also consider going to Breastplate or Valor here. But I think this is something that will work more effectively against most enemies in many situations. I hope this gave you a good overview, and if you want to see more overviews in the future, feel free to hit the sub button and maybe the bell. Tomorrow we'll talk about Willis changes throughout the years, probably, if I can finish that. And then soon we're also going to have a full-on Tsukuyomi guide for when he gets released, so you know how to play him from day one. And then we're also going to look at some Hunter stuff in the near future, so those are the upcoming plans for now. And with that, thank you guys very much for watching, I hope to see you for the next one soon. Duke Sloth, out.